technical topic that I've chosen in terms of the title. But when we get to the first sections, I think you will understand that there's some principles behind it that I want to use the table to understand and explore a little more deeply in understanding, what are the important. We have feast days, we have solemnities, we have optional memorials, we have memorials. Why all these levels? What's this about? And so a little bit of delving into that through the principles in terms of liturgy. So the other party I would say is he said, I'm an expert. Well, I studied canon law. It's not exactly, we do take a little bit of liturgical law, but it's more in terms of the code of canon law that is my particular expertise in that regard. The order of precedence regarding the choice of Mass. As I said, we want to begin with a few principles. And the first principle most of the principles are going to come from Sacrosanctum Concilium. Do you remember what that document is? It's the first document of Vatican II, which dealt particularly with the liturgy and helping to bring it to what are the important points and some renovations they wanted to make in terms of how we understand the calendar and liturgy itself. And so the first thing they pointed to is the Lord's Day. Okay? That the Lord's Day take precedence. That it is the original feast day we hear. So what commandment does this connect with? Keep holy the Sabbath day. So the church wants to keep holy the Sabbath day and help people to, and there's a principle behind keeping holy the Sabbath day. It's about that relationship between people and God, right? And so the church is meant to be one that enables us in our relationship with God. And that the church wants to help us to have that connection and to be living that once every 7 days in a way that's real and authentic and involving us. And so keeping holy that Sabbath day, the original feast day, helps us to have that time with God. We know it's the joy of the day and freedom from work, hopefully. Now, not everybody's going to have the day off anymore. That disappeared from our secular society a little while ago. And so because the Lord's Day takes precedence, then we hear that other celebrations, unless they are of truly greatest importance, should not take precedence over Sunday, which is the foundation and kernel of the whole liturgical year. Now, can you think of a couple of days that might be more important than Sunday? Christmas, Easter. You've hit two very important days. So we're going to see through this how the church describes that. But we think when we hear about the liturgical year and the kernel. So the next part, it is that the minds of the faith should be directed primarily towards the feast of the Lord, whereby the mysteries of salvation, Christmas and Easter particularly, are celebrated throughout the year. And for this reason, the proper of time shall be given due preference over the feast of the saints, so that the entire cycle of the mysteries of salvation may be suitably recalled. Which of the 2 days does that impact the most? Christmas is on which day? December 25th, so it doesn't move around. It's not like another feast day lands on top of it. Easter moves, right? And because Easter moves, sometimes it lands on this date or this feast or that feast. And okay, well, if it lands on the feast of St. Joseph, which takes priority. If it lands on the Annunciation of the Lord, the March 25th, what happens? If it lands, so that aspect of Easter takes precedent. And we're going to see that when we get to the order of the table. And so that the mysteries of salvation are to take precedence in the year. And so these things take precedent over, okay, which saint is this day? Okay? And so that aspect of which is more important in terms of our relationship with God, not to say the saints aren't important, because they have a role to play. They have a place in the church and such. We hear that the saints have traditionally been honored in the church, and their authentic relics and images held in veneration. Good. And for the feast of the saints proclaim the wonderful work of Christ in his servants and offer to the faithful fitting examples. And isn't that what we see in the saints? Examples in terms of their life of holiness, or their way of working with the poor as part of that holiness, or their service to others, their private prayer. Each saint has their particular way of living that way of holiness that's unique to them. And so, but their examples help us. And then, but even though we honor them, we hear lest that this feast of the saints should take precedence over the feast which commemorate the very mysteries of salvation. Many of them should be left to be celebrated by a particular church, or nation, or family of religious. Only those should be extended to the universal church, which commemorates saints who are truly of universal importance. When we say particular church, do you know what that means? Particular church in this circumstance, yes, that aspect, particular church. We also see in Code of Canon Law, particular church is named for a diocese as well. So you have that larger sense of that it can be, so particularly when it's the particular church. I think it's, anyway, it could be either of those. I should have looked more carefully at that part. But of nation or family of religious. So if it had, I think for the example of the Jesuits, have a whole list of their saints that they celebrate. And they're not all extended to the universal church. And so if you're in a Jesuit community on a particular day, we're celebrating this feast today. And you may have gone, I've even heard of this one. And so for them, it's an important one because it's from their community, but it's not necessarily important to everyone. And that's what this is getting at. If you're in Italy, in the area of where Padre Pio was from, he's going to have a particular importance, not just in that little town, but in the area as well. And so his feast day is going to have some much more significance than some others. Can you name some saints that have universal? Saint Joseph, certainly. Saint Peter, yes. Saint Anne and Saint Joachim, yes. I think of Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Teresa of Avila. Saint Elizabeth is an optional, so she's not quite universal in the larger sense, that she's not become a right? The doctors of the church tend to be of that higher nature, yeah. And so these are just some examples, okay? And so that aspect of the calendar of saints, but the calendar of time as well. Now we get to what I was talking about, what we're getting to. If several of these celebrations fall on the same day, okay, what does Father choose? Does he get the choice? Why does it, why does it tend to be fairly uniform across the world? And so the one that holds the highest rank according to the table of liturgical days is observed. And so there's a table that tells us that helps us to figure that out. Now, however, a solemnity impeded by a liturgical day that takes precedence over it should be transferred to the closest day not listed under number 1 to 8, which we'll see in the table, provided that what is laid down in number 5 is observed. And so we're going to see some details in that regard. Can you think of, well, it's actually one listed there. The next one, it gives us a wonderful example of it. As to the solemnity of the Annunciation of the Lord, whenever it falls on any of the days of Holy Week, it is always transferred to the Monday after the second Sunday of Easter. So we've had that happen in the last few years where March 25th was in the midst of Holy Week and it got celebrated in April. Okay, and so this is a particular rule for that particular day. But so there are some examples of that. And other celebrations are omitted in that year. So if they get hit by Sunday or if they get hit by another day because of Easter and how it moves, they are just suppressed that year. Example, St. Joseph. If it lands in Holy Week, it doesn't get transferred. It's divided in the table in the book, in what we call it's found in the germ section of the Roman Missal. And so the first section is actually that of solemnities, and it's going to cover a certain number of the numbers. And so we see number 1 is the Paschal Triduum of the Passion and Resurrection of the Lord. So its number 1 tells us what is the most important feast day in the church? Easter Triduum. The Triduum, the whole of the Triduum, not just Easter Sunday. Okay? Because it talks about the Paschal Triduum. And so it is the central celebration of our faith. And we think about if it was just the resurrection, well, it's how he died as well. It's important, and the Last Supper and all of that. And then we see number 2 is a few items listed together. And so we have the next one is, of course, what we would expect, Nativity of the Lord, right? But we also see appended to it is also the Epiphany, the Ascension, and Pentecost. They're considered liturgically equal priority. Now, Christmas is never hit by the Pentecost and things like that. They're far enough apart in the year that they're not going to land on top of each other. But equally important we see are the Sundays of Advent, Lent, and Easter. What do you notice is not in that list? The Sundays of Christmas aren't in that section. So they're of a little bit lesser importance. And it's an interesting thing to see. And then we have Ash Wednesday, which we would understand as something very important. And then the weekdays of Holy Week from Monday up to including Thursday and days within the Easter octave. So have you heard of the Easter octave before? And that aspect that, what does that mean? It's in the sense that the joy of Easter is so big we can't celebrate it in one day. We're going to take 8 days of equal solemnity to celebrate the importance of Easter. And so that's not quite of the importance of the first, of the Paschal or Easter Vigil, but it's very close in terms of importance. Yes. Why is there no Mass on Good Friday? It's tradition of the church not to have it, and particularly because we want to commemorate his death without jumping to the resurrection. So actually, when we talk about the Easter Triduum, it is one liturgy with 3 stations in a sense. We have the Holy Thursday, the Good Friday with the service, and then we have the Easter Vigil. And it forms very much a unity of the 3 liturgies. They're not completely separate. And so we don't have Mass on Good Friday because it's also in the midst of that larger unity of the Triduum. Okay? Yes? So you hear the same thing again on Good Friday. So what you hear on Passion Sunday, you'll hear the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, or Luke. On Palm Sunday, or Passion Sunday, it's both the same name. And then Good Friday, you always have the Gospel of John. So it is a similar story, but they're always from the different Gospels. And so we encourage people to celebrate the Triduum. Is it a day of obligation? No. So that's part of the reason Passion Sunday includes the Passion, so that those who only go on the obligations actually have the Passion narrative. And then they go to the resurrection. Okay? And so there's that aspect we see within the liturgical cycle. Now we get into this, so we had 1, 2, and now we have number 3 here. And the solemnities inscribed in the general calendar, whether of the Lord, or of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or of the saints. So they this, and then commemorations of all the faithful departed are equal in a sense, are almost equal, and they are number 3. So when All Souls Day lands on Sunday, what happens? Which takes precedent? All Souls Day does. We'll see that in a minute because we'll see the Sundays of Ordinary Time are listed later at number 6. And so we see that All Souls Day will take precedent. And so next year, I believe All Souls Day will be on Sunday. And so you will see that in action. And so that aspect that it takes precedent. Proper solemnities. So this gets at the name of things. So the solemnity of the principal patron of the place, city, or state. So that actually is a level, fairly high level. It takes precedent over Sundays of Ordinary Time. This is number 4. And I just told you Sundays are number 6. And the solemnity of dedication and anniversary of one's own church. So anniversary is probably the dedication. Like if it's the dedication of the church. So it could be the anniversary of naming it a parish. It doesn't have a precedent in the same. But if it's the anniversary of the dedication of the church itself, we see that it's number 4B. Or of the patron. So if you have the feast of I'm thinking St. John. We have St. John the Apostle. That's in December, the 27th. So it would have this level of importance, okay, where it fits in. And so the titles of your parish have a fairly high significance. So depending, and some work more, or have that help them a little. Some, like St. Andrew. Yeah, I was in St. Andrews in the other diocese. The feast day is November 30th, right? When it lands on a Sunday, what happens? What if St. Andrews lands on the Sunday? Is it Ordinary Time? It'll be always the first Sunday of Advent. So it never gets bumped. It always gets bumped by number 2, which is the Sunday of Advent. So it never gets celebrated on a Sunday unless the bishop or someone were to give special permission to up St. Andrew to that. Now, if it happens, so on the Sunday it doesn't get celebrated. It means in the weekdays of Advent is a different story. But on the Sunday it doesn't take precedent. The solemnity of the title of one's own church. So Queen of the Most Holy Rosary, that's what I was getting at earlier. So in B, it was the dedication or the anniversary dedication. And then C, it's the title. So Queen of the Most Holy Rosary or St. John the Apostle. And then the solemnity of either the title or the founder or of the principal patron of an order or congregation. So what's that referring to? St. Ignatius of Loyola was the founder of the Jesuits. St. Dominic for the Dominicans. St. Francis for the Franciscans. For the Oblates. Eugene Mazenod. Yeah. And St. John Bosco for a particular group. Yes. So for us to be celebrating it as a church, he first has to become more than just where they started the process. Okay? He has to have at least made it to blessed before you, and even that normally would have to be a saint before it becomes for the whole diocese in a sense. Okay? For his order, for it to be a solemnity of that level, he would have to be a saint. Okay? They could celebrate it as a blessed or whatever, but it wouldn't rise to the level of a solemnity. We'll see that it'll be a little lesser, whether it's a memorial or something like that. Okay? And so that aspect of the founder or the title of the congregation. Trying to think of an order that's named after a particular feast day. The Augustinians. So St. Augustine is not their founder, but they're named after him. So his feast day would be a solemnity for them. Okay? Of this level. and the principal patron of the order. So principal patron, they name them, they choose someone to be their inspiration, let's say. Okay? Because you're established on a certain date doesn't mean that becomes your patron. Okay? The diocese, the people, the bishop of the diocese at the time it's created chooses who they want to have as the patron and secondary patron. Now, that date was chosen on purpose in Rome because he is an important Canadian saint. So it's not an accident. It happened on the feast day of Saint Francois, the bishop, Saint Francois de Laval. So it was chosen purposely because it's appropriate. We're under Quebec. Quebec is our primary see within within Canada, and so it was chosen on that because of the role he played as the first bishop of Canada. Okay. And so that aspect of the solemnities. If we go to the next slide, now we're going to notice before it was all ones, you noticed? All solemnities. Now we got a number 2 at the top of the table. And we notice the titles have changed now. We see it's feasts. So before this, it was solemnities up to the end of 4. From 5 on, 5 for the next little bit, we're under feast days. The next level we see is the feast of the Lord inscribed in the general calendar. So of the feasts, the highest priority within feasts itself are those of the Lord. Can you think of some feasts of the Lord? Transfiguration is one that I can certainly, it was the only one I can think of at the top of my head, but certainly that's one of them. Then we notice we have the Sundays of Christmas time and the Sundays of ordinary time. So if the Transfiguration or if one of those feasts of the Lord lands on a Sunday in ordinary time or Christmas, look what takes priority. That does, the feast of the Lord. And then we have feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints in the general calendar. So all of them just fall underneath the Sundays of ordinary time. So the Sundays would take precedent over them, but that they're next. Then we get into a whole bunch of different ones. So the feast of the principal patron of the diocese. So that's what this level would be on its own. So if you happen to be the principal patron was Saint Elizabeth, this would raise it up to, it would be at this level. If you're choosing Immaculate, let's say your principal patron was something of the Lord, it would be higher because of what it is, not because of this aspect, okay? So it would be the higher part. Now, we notice that the principal patron of the diocese is a feast, but the principal patron of the place was the solemnity. Did you notice that? And so that aspect to see as well. And then the feast of the anniversary of the dedication of the cathedral. Where was the dedication of the church? It was a solemnity. But the cathedral is not just celebrated. So if the cathedral's anniversary, it's a solemnity for the cathedral itself. But for the rest of the churches of the diocese, it's a feast day. Okay? And so that's the level it is. And then the feast of the principal patron of the region or a province. But a region in terms of, I think of Europe, they have regions which aren't just provinces, a few areas together. That's what the principal patron of that region would land, or province or country or wider territory. And then we have the feast of the title of the founder or principal patron of an order or congregation, without prejudice to the prescriptions given under number 4. And so if it's a founder or the title founder or principal patron of the order, there's a difference here relative to, of a religious province. So let's say, religious orders, you understand, like they have provinces, and so each one of them may have a principal patron. If it's the same patron or founder as the order, it would be the solemnity because it's already there. But if it's the founder of a province or of the patron that's different from that, from the whole order, it would only be a feast day. And then other feasts proper to the individual church. Earlier, the example of Bob Bedard, if he became a saint, you could see for St. Mary's, Annunciation of the Lord, and St. Maurice, they would have this level of feast day for him, okay, because they have a very strong connection. It might not be the same for the rest, but they would want it at least at this level, okay? And then other feasts inscribed in the calendar of each diocese, order, or congregation. So the diocese can establish certain feast days of lower saints and say, we're going to celebrate them at this level, okay? So the diocese can choose that in terms of the bishop and naming some days. Number 9, weekdays of Lent, or Advent, I should say, and then the days of the octave of Christmas and the weekdays of Lent are of similar priority. What about Advent? Was that all of the Advent season? It's just the last 8 days, isn't it? And so it's the same period as the O antiphons, if you've ever heard of that for prayer. And so that period of the last 8 days before Christmas, Advent has a higher solemnity in a sense than the first set of days. Because only certain dates saints become on the general calendar. You saw that in the early principle, only those of universal importance. And in a sense, we celebrate, it's the day they've passed to enter into eternal life is the day that's chosen. And so it just happened to be, there's not a saint named for your date yet of universal importance. And the other aspect that you see from this is that unless they are really high-level saint, these days are still going to take precedence, okay? Because unless there is solemnity almost, they pretty well feast. They'd have to be a feast day, not a feast in the ordinary calendar. And other saints, number 7. So this is just under it. So feast of the ordinary calendar just above it. And so it would have to be that level of feast, not a memorial, or it won't get celebrated on your birthday. Okay? The Advent would take precedent. We notice the weekdays of Lent are quite significant as well, all the weekdays of Lent. Not the highest, but they're fairly high in terms of precedent. We notice now we're gotten out of feast days now, we're into memorials, whether obligatory or optional. And that's in the 3rd section. And so we have the obligatory memorials in the general calendar, and then the proper obligatory memorials, namely the memorial of a secondary patron of the place, the diocese, region, or religious province, or other obligatory memorials inscribed in the calendar of each diocese or congregation. So ones that the diocese chooses to move up to be an obligatory memorial can be of this level as well. So the diocese can choose to increase somebody who might be an optional or someone just of local importance. I can think of the example of some of the Quebec-born saints. They're not in the universal calendar, but the one who sort of just been named, they would be in their home diocese where they grew up or worked. They would be elevated to certainly this level within the parish would choose, often the diocese will choose to do that because it's a local saint, okay? I think, for example, Brother Andre, Montreal probably made him at least an obligatory memorial within their diocese because he's so significant to them. Then we have the optional memorials, which, however, may be celebrated in the special manner described in the general instruction of the Roman Missal and the Liturgy of the Hours, even on the days listed in number 9. So number 9 is the weekdays of Advent, so getting into the 17th to the 24th, the octave of Christmas, and Lent. So it can be done there. And in the same manner, obligatory memorials may be celebrated as optional memorials if they happen to fall in Lent weekdays. So it's connecting with that number 9 as well. And then number 13, we get to the last of the list, the weekdays of Advent, between the beginning of Advent to the 16th. So it's this level. The weekdays of Christmas time, from January 2nd to Sunday after Epiphany. And then the weekdays of the Easter time from Monday after the octave up to including the Saturday before Pentecost. And last, but not least, the weekdays of ordinary time. So that is the lowest level in terms of importance. Okay? So this helps you understand Father doesn't just choose which ones to do. Okay? Now, we did see some allowance in there for particularly optional memorials you can choose to celebrate. It doesn't have to. That's first of all a choice. And also, it can be a region or a particular authority you can choose to raise someone up because of local importance. A few examples of special days that run into this. I did mention the first one, November 30th, being that of also of the first Sunday of Lent. What about the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary on September 8th? So when we look at that, we look back at it's a feast of Mary, and so it's on the level, it's a feast of number 7, but the Sundays in ordinary time are number 6. So it doesn't take precedent. So the Sunday, if it lands on Sunday, you would celebrate the Sunday in ordinary time. Now, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary on August 15th is, we see, a solemnity, right? So it would be under that list on number 3, while the sun, and in August we are going to be in ordinary time, which is number 6. So which will take precedent? Mary's, the solemnity of the Assumption of Blessed Virgin Mary. St. Joseph, March 19th, often hits with Easter or the Sundays of Lent. So if it's a Sunday of Lent, it falls away that year. Now, we did see for the March 25th, it gets postponed if it's in Holy Week or whatever. But this, if it's in octave and those days, Holy Week or the octave of Easter, St. Joseph will be suppressed that year. St. Patrick, he's only an optional memorial, actually. So we can see a lot takes precedent. Now, but the other part we have with St. Patrick is, for the Irish, he is terribly important, right? And so they push to have him elevated, in a sense, by the local church, in a sense. So they'll ask, particular parishes named after St. Patrick will petition the Archbishop to say, even though it says, can we celebrate it on a Sunday of Lent, Lent, let's say, if it lands on that day, can we have at least celebrating that? We'll do the readings of the day, but we'll have the prayer of St. Patrick or something. So a combination of that aspect, okay? And then we got the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. That usually falls after Pentecost. And so it's a Sunday of ordinary time, but it's a solemnity of a saint, which is number 3 again, versus a 6. So they would be celebrated on the Sunday if they landed on it. Okay? Can you think of some other examples? Questions? I thought of a few others, but we think about Christmas on Sunday, right? Which takes precedent. We know from experience last year. What was it? It was Christmas, right? It wasn't the Sunday. We saw that too. All Souls Days, we saw the other one. All Saints Day. Where does it land? Which one would take precedent? It's a solemnity of all saints, right? So it again will be a number 3. And that time of year is Souls. So, that time of year it's an ordinary time. So All Saints Day, if it lands on Sunday, technically according to this would be the All Saints Day that would be remembered. Any questions? Holy days of obligation, so that each Bishop's Conference has the ability to celebrate it on that day or to move it to the Sunday. So if we want to take, so we've moved Ascension from the Thursday to the Sunday. If it was celebrated on the Thursday, it would be a level, the solemnity of the Lord. So it would be a level 3 then, right? But if it moves on to the Sunday, we take precedent over the Sunday of Easter because we choose to move it. Your Sunday Missal isn't quite as thick as this book is, okay? So it's in the midst of this book that 2 pages comes from, and then the germ points are actually on that point. So if you want to see it, if you want to know what page it's on in the Missal, it's on pages 112 and 113 out of this book here. Okay? Pardon me? The Roman Missal, the book the priest used on the altar. I don't have the copier here, so I can't copy it and bring it to you. So that's my issue in that regard. So, GERM stands for the General Instruction of the Roman Missal. Okay, so basically what that GERM means is it's the instructions at the front of the Roman Missal, which the general instructions for telling us how to use the whole book. So it's a section at the front of the book of the Roman Missal that tells us how to use the rest of the texts and stuff. So it has the order, it has the instructions about the priest, what to do when he comes in, when he's supposed to genuflect, and when people stand, when people kneel, when people sit. All of that is in the general instruction part, okay? Now, there is also the aspect of the Bishops' Conference being given the choice to make some adaptations and make some decisions. And so that is also in the germ part. Bishops' Conference to Bishops' Conference, yes. So the adaptations will change. The root part of the germ is universal to the whole church, but each bishop conference makes some posture decisions, and those will be a little individual between one bishop's conference and another. Now, within Canada, you say, why do we kneel some points? And if you go to Toronto, they kneel at different points, because there's 2 options within the Canadian Missal about how the postures around the Eucharistic prayer and communion. So there's 2 options in there. Yes. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. You say it's a little technical, but it was something I found interesting with my math background. So why does this take precedence over this? And if you think about mathematics, okay, why does the multiplication take precedence over the adding? It connects to that kind of idea. Like, how do you understand a line when it's written that way? So it connects with that in my brain. So, okay, thank you.